Few journalists covered President Jimmy Carter as closely as my next guest. Judy Woodruff actually began her career covering Jimmy Carter's rise in Georgia state politics. And after covering Carter's successful 1976 presidential bid, Judy took on the White House beat for NBC. It was there on election night in 1980 where she reported that Carter would be a one-term president. Watch.
Reporters haven't seen the president since he flew back to Washington from Georgia earlier today, where he voted. But when he spoke to the townspeople in Plains this morning, almost 12 hours ago, he choked up as he talked about hoping that he had fulfilled his commitment to the people of his region. I think it was evident at that point to the people who have been following the president in this long campaign that the president knew what was ahead.
Judy Woodruff, the remarkable Judy Woodruff, a senior correspondent, former anchor for the PBS NewsHour, also a former CNN anchor, joins me now. Judy, it's so great to have you on this night, and so great to see that clip. You began like right out of college in Georgia and started covering Jimmy Carter when he was running for his second time, actually, to try to get to be the Georgia governor. He'd lost the first time.
Exactly right, Anderson. I was a year and a half out of college. I had just been hired by the CBS affiliate in Atlanta to cover Georgia politics. And guess who was running for governor? A peanut farmer who had tried unsuccessfully in 1966, but he was trying again. He was running against the former governor of the state, but he managed to defeat, not only to defeat them, but to defeat expectations. And I think it's, that's been the story, or was the story of his life. Again and again and again, Jimmy Carter was underestimated, written off, and look at what he achieved. And yes, his presidency ended in one term, but he went on to do the things that you've just been discussing with your guests.
And he was a long shot to become the governor. As you said, he had lost it once before. He wasn't really part of the Democratic machine in Georgia. He was kind of an outsider. This is a state that, it was a brutally racist state under segregation. Lester Maddox had the power there. He was a real departure, and as governor, he made a famous speech in which he said words to the effect of, the time for racial segregation is over.
And it was interesting, Anderson, because in his campaign for governor, he had been very careful to appeal to the most conservative Democrats in the state. He invited George Wallace to come and speak in Georgia. He reached out to notorious segregationists. And yet, as you just said, when he was inaugurated governor, the line that everybody remembers is the time for racial segregation is over. He was then seen as the up-and-coming governor, representing the, quote, New South. He had a tough time, though, as governor. I'll never forget an interview with the Georgia Speaker of the State House of Representatives, who told me in an interview, he said, Jimmy Carter is trying to run the state like he's the commander of a nuclear submarine. In other words, he thought he could give out orders, and that was Carter's background. He was a nuclear engineer. He had worked under Hyman Rickover, and he was really brilliant. I mean, he brought all those engineering skills, his interest in literature, faith, theology, art, the arts, music, to his career in politics. And you put it all together, didn't necessarily make for a great mix in politics, and I think that attributed to his loss after one term.
Well, I find it so interesting, though, because, I think for a lot of people who only know him as a post-president and as an older man, you see this kind of soft-spoken guy, aw shucks, he seems. But, nobody becomes president of the United States or governor of Georgia at that time by just kind of showing up. And from what I've heard you say before, he had a will of steel. He was driven in ways that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Completely driven, and what I think all of us would love to know is what was the secret sauce. His father was demanding, and Jimmy Carter wrote about this in at least one of his books. He wrote about how his father was very tough on him, expected him to achieve at a high level. He was the firstborn son. And he said he could be punitive when I didn't achieve what I was expected to do. He said I would hurt. It would hurt me, but then I would get over it. I'd get up the next day and keep going. Probably some psychologist could tell us, how that all played out over his life, but there was something burning deep inside of Jimmy Carter that drove him to want to make the most of every minute. And you heard this, I think, from your first guest in the hour, from Jill and from the pastor. He wanted to do everything he could to help those who couldn't help themselves. And it's the reason he worked on the peace in the Middle East. It was the reason he made human rights the passion of a lifetime for him. He literally put the battle for human rights on the map. It wasn't something that people talked about before Jimmy Carter. And then, of course, we know what the Carter Center has been all about.
Judy Woodruff, getting to work occasionally alongside you has been one of the highlights of my career, and I love watching you on television, and I love having you on the show tonight. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Take care. Few people know what grief is.